Climate change. CO2. What is CO2? Why do we hear the term CO2 when climate change is mentioned? How do CO2 and climate change interact with each other? And what are some things we can do to reduce CO2 in our environment to slow climate change? These are a few questions and concerns that some of you may find answers to throughout my presentation. So let's get down to business and take a look at CO2, also known as carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is a well-known greenhouse gas that is an important piece to the puzzle of climate change. It enters our environment in many ways. Some of these ways are through humans just breathing, and as we breathe in oxygen, we exhale CO2. A more complex way is when plants breathe in CO2, they exhale oxygen. The CO2 that they inhale becomes stored in their cellular structure of the plant, and this becomes known as a fossil fuel. When CO2 is stored in things like trees or coal and they are set on fire, the carbon mixes with oxygen and becomes carbon dioxide, also known as CO2. This is then released back into the environment, and the CO2 gets trapped with other pollutants in the Earth's atmosphere and then starts to absorb heat from the radiant sun. In most cases, this heat would typically escape, but the gas molecules heat up with the other contaminants and trap the heat back on Earth, causing higher temperatures. These are just a few ways CO2 enters our environment. We have covered a few questions about what CO2 is, the role it plays in climate change, and how fossil fuel releases CO2 back into our environment. Now let's discuss how to reduce CO2 so we can slow climate change. One of the ways we can significantly reduce CO2 is starting with our diets. We can choose locally grown foods that are not transported from other states or countries, which methods of transportation would require burning and uses of fossil fuels for transportation and cooled food storage to prevent spoiling. Be conscious of your decisions and how it will impact our climate.
My topic is how everyday Americans can help fight climate change. My topic is how everyday Americans can help fight climate change. One major contributor to climate change is carbon. Americans on average produce 21 tons of carbon a year, about 4 times the global average. Limiting carbon is a big way people can help fight against climate change. Some ways you can do this are: use alternatives to driving like walking, riding your bike, carpooling, and using public transportation. You can drive a fuel-efficient vehicle like an electric car. Don't speed or accelerate unnecessarily. You can do other things like combine your errands, make fewer trips out, remove excess weight from your car, use cruise control. There are other small ways you can help fight climate change. Some things you can do in your home are using LED lights. If every household in the United States replaced just one incandescent light with an LED light, we would prevent 7 billion pounds of carbon pollution per year. You can also invest in energy efficient appliances and recycle old appliances. Keep your electronics from drawing excess energy, adjust your washing machine settings, and clean the dryer lint filter after each cycle. Consider a heat pump water heater or a hybrid model. Insulate to prevent heat from escaping. This could actually cut your heating bill by 25% and reduce carbon pollution by more than 2 million metric tons a year. You can replace drafty windows with double pane Energy Star rated windows. Make sure your fridge and freezer doors are sealed tightly when they are closed. Use a programmable thermostat. Check the air filter on your furnace, turn down the temperature of your water heater, cut down on snail mail. Paper bills actually generate 2 million tons of carbon pollution a year. Stop throwing away old food, compost, go on a climate-friendly diet, use less water, invest in green power like solar energy, plant a tree, get an energy audit to show you where you can cut energy. There are things you can do that involve travel, like service your vehicle regularly and fly less often. You can also make changes in your workplace. These are things like using a laptop or mini desktop, try and use less paper, bring your own coffee mugs, promote waste cutting office policies. Of course, these things won't take the place of government intervention, but it's a good first step to making the world a better place. My topic is how everyday Americans can help fight climate change. One major contributor to climate change is carbon. Americans on average produce 21 tons of carbon a year, about 4 times the global average. Limiting carbon is a big way people can help fight against climate change. Some ways you can do this are
So, when it comes to climate change, who can we really trust to give us that information? Well, when it comes to obtaining information about serious topics such as climate change, people never really know who they can trust. And I'm not here to tell you who to listen to, I'm just going to help guide you in the right direction. Greta Thunberg, for example, has become one of the most well-known climate change activists. For those who are not aware of exactly who Greta Thunberg is, she's a 17-year-old from Sweden who became interested in the science behind climate change at only the age of 8. She educated herself very well with information given from scientists, and with that information at hand, she has started to reduce her carbon footprint. She protests at rallies, and she has even talked to well-known world leaders to get them to start doing more to fight climate change. And rather than voicing her opinions, her own thoughts, she is telling all of her followers and just about anyone to just listen to what scientists have to say. She gets all of her information from scientists, and she hopes that she can talk other people into doing the same exact thing. Then on the other hand, we have President Trump, and many of Trump's supporters just listen to just about anything he says, even if it's opinion rather than fact, and this can be really troubling. After tracking Trump's views on climate change back to 2009, I found that he has been very inconsistent with what he's saying, and that's very misleading because in 2009 he signed an advert for the New York Times in support for legislation combating climate change, and then it kind of switched up towards like the beginning of his presidency, and in an interview in 2016 he stated he believes that there is some connectivity between human activity and climate change, but then in 2018 he says that it's not man-made. So you can just tell that like he has been very inconsistent with his beliefs, and he is telling his followers and supporters his opinions on this, and they're just not matching, especially his actions on the subject of climate change do not match it, because he dropped out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and it's just, he's very inconsistent with what he says versus what he does. So thinking about topics as prominent as climate change, one should look into the science behind it all. Take in facts rather than opinions. Don't always listen to what people say without doing research. It can be very helpful in the long run, not just for you, but for the planet that we call home.
How much does travel impact the environment? As I hope all of you know, that travel by plane is the worst alternative for the environment. The Arctic ice will melt 32 square feet for each person who flies 2,500 miles. That is Los Angeles to New York. When the ice melts, will the Earth become even warmer? Because the dark mountains that are under the ice will now absorb the sun, and as you know, dark things will get a lot warmer than white things, as ice. The year 2012 had the average melting of the Arctic ice risen to 40% more than it's ever been before. When the ice melts that much, the ocean level will rise and city can be totally underwater. Some islands in the Pacific Ocean have already been affected big time by the high water, and some islands are almost gone. Countries like the Netherlands and cities like Miami will be affected more than others, and if the water rises only a few feet, it will still make a huge, terrible difference. Extreme weather will come more often. Since the 80s, as natural disasters affected us over 5 times more than before. The number of deaths has risen a lot over the past 10 years, not only in poor countries but also in Europe, and extreme weather will come more often. The difference between travel by plane and train is huge. For every mile that one passenger travels by plane, the emissions are half a pound of carbon dioxide. Travel 1 mile by a car and the emissions are 0.37 pounds. Compare that with domestic trains, where 1 mile of traveling only emits 0.09 pounds of carbon dioxide, and the new train, Eurostar, only emits 0.01 carbon dioxide every mile. Everyone must take their responsibility so our grandkids will have an earth to live on.
What is contributing to our air quality and how does it impact us? The quality of the air has been an issue for quite a long time, and it's an issue that scientists have been researching for decades. So where does the air quality issue start? There are two major types of air pollution: ozone and particle pollution. Ozone, more commonly known as smog, is created from the pollution that comes from factories, cars, and lots of other industrial sources. Particle pollution is a mix of tiny solid and liquid particles that are in the air that we breathe. Particles form through two separate processes, mechanical and chemical. The mechanical process breaks down bigger particles into smaller particles, with the material staying the same, just becoming smaller. Dust storms, construction, demolition, mining operations, and agriculture are some of the activities that produce these particles. Tire, brake pad, and road erosion can also create particles. Chemical processes in the atmosphere create most of the smallest and ultrafine particles in the air. Burning fuels, other human activity, and natural sources emit gas that form particles in the air. These particles can mix with other chemicals in the air, creating compounds and even more particles. So what chemicals are being pumped into the air to create these particles and smog? Nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds are produced when fossil fuels like gasoline, oil, and coal are burned, or chemicals like solvents evaporate. Nitrogen oxides are released from power plants, vehicles, industrial boilers, cement kilns, turbines, and so many other sources. Volatile organic compounds are released from vehicles, chemical plants, factories, gas stations, aerosol sprays, cleaners, disinfectants, and lots of other sources. So how does this affect us and who is at risk? Ozone and particle pollution is one of the least controlled pollutants in America and even the world. It is deadly and harmful to breathe. Breathing these pollutants can even shorten your life. These pollutants affect everyone: children, adults, and especially people with pre-existing medical conditions like lung disease or asthma. Other deadly pollutants include gases like hydrogen chloride, benzene, dioxin, or compounds like asbestos. What diseases and harm to the body does air pollution cause? Air pollution can cause lung cancer, bone cancer, kidney cancer, and stomach cancer. It can harm your nervous system, your brain, your cardiovascular system. It can cause birth defects and decreased fertility. It causes coughing, wheezing, and impaired lung function too. So how will air pollution affect the future? According to the Environmental Protection Agency, scientists are pursuing an understanding of how climate change and air quality interact and the outcomes for public health and the environment. EPA scientists have been already given evidence that future temperature increases will raise air pollution levels in some regions of the country. So what can you do right now to reduce air pollution? Some suggested ways to reduce air pollution are conserving energy, using public transportation or biking instead of driving, carpooling, using environmentally safe paints and cleaning products. Many other methods to reduce pollution can be found on the United States Environmental Protection Agency website.
7 months ago, my grandpa passed away. He had bone cancer for almost 2 years. My mother was the only one who helped him. No one should have to do something that difficult all alone. So when I ask you, what are you doing for our Earth? Are you doing it alone? What would you say? Now, I don't want you to answer all these questions for me. I just want you to think about it through this TED Talk. Our population is on the rise. In 1971, there were 3.9 billion people on Earth. Now there are 7.8 billion people. In almost half a century, our population has doubled. Earth has a carrying capacity, and we don't know the cutoff. But what we do know is that if we continue living the way we do, we won't survive. The more people on Earth means the less resources we have. If we continue living the way we do without change, as a planet, we will meet our footprint. The number of people Earth could sustain would have sat at 1.9 billion people, which was 100 years ago in 1919. Where do we start? Well, we can start by reducing our population rate. If we educate and empower women, that could be the key to lowering birth rates in developing countries. We also could reduce our consumption. Each individual could cut down on meat, specifically red meat. This could reduce consumption of resources. If we don't change now, our population will be at 11 billion people at the end of the century.